Good morning. Okay, so let's finish this tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstein about the Rebbe who opened up the shtibel, and there was some kind of broigus that ensued, and now as a result, a number of people have left his shtibel, have gone to daven at another shtibel, and the Rebbe is demanding some kind of compensation. So Rav Moshe had said that the claim of the people who left was that they weren't happy with changing the nusach of the davening. They don't like the nigunim. They're not used to the type of davening that the Rebbe does. So that's one reason. And they also argued that in this situation, the Rebbe had insulted one of their rebbeim, and he was giving them frightening sermonic material to the point where they felt they were being insulted because he was calling them all different kinds of nasty names because of their behavior. Okay, so those were the claims of the people who left the shul and why they felt that they were entitled to leave. The Rebbe's claim is they've been davening there for 3 years already, and what's the big deal? They're able to get used to the nusach and the nigunim. And I only got upset. I only lost my temper twice, and it was only because I was personally insulted by this Rebbe of theirs, and I had to give them musar. And a rabbi's allowed to dispense fiery musar from the pulpit to try his best to rehabilitate his flock. So this is what Rav Moshe is weighing, and his first argument was that this other shtibel that they started, they had no right to start it because this was causing a loss of parnasa for the first Rebbe. Now, even though this seems to fly in the face of what we had learned before, that two people are allowed to put up a shingle and service the public, and a second guy can come in and open up his shop whenever he wants. Apparently, Rav Moshe felt that in this situation, this was going to cause financial ruin for this Rebbe because he was making a parnasa off of having members daven in his shul. And this new shtibel doesn't charge membership. It doesn't charge people to come daven with them. And as a result, it's causing financial ruin for the Rebbe, and it's not providing any new parnasa to anybody else. And as a result, it's not fair. Okay, so that was Rav Moshe's first argument. Now, he then presented us yesterday with an interesting argument called Darchei Shalom. It's a different kind of Darchei Shalom than we had learned before, as far as being, the rabbis prohibiting us from taking something that's hefker. This Darchei Shalom argument revolves specifically around a person who has established a pattern of having the privilege of doing a particular mitzvah that is honorific in the eyes of the public. And Darchei Shalom decrees that you don't have a right to take that away from him, even if the argument is you want to be more democratic about it and share the wealth. You don't have a right to do that. And the example that is given by the Gemara is if a person is used to keeping a box of matzahs in his house for the Eruv, and now they want to start distributing it around the different people's houses, he can say that the law of Darchei Shalom does not allow them to take that privilege away from him. And this was codified in Shulchan Aruch, that if a person is used to having people daven in his basement, and it's an established pattern, you don't have a right to take that away from that person and start moving the minyan around. And so the Rav Moshe wants to argue that if the reason, and as the Magen Avram had said, that as long as there's no strong, compelling reason to move the mitzvah away from this fellow, you have to let him keep the minyan at his house. Okay. Now he continues that line of reasoning. He says, "Ach mitzad iser zeh de darchei shalom." This is where we're up to. Im yesh lahem te'ana gedola. If they have a significant grievance in the case of Darchei Shalom, where one person has an established chazaka, a pattern of doing this mitzvah for a long-standing period. If, however, the other people have a significant grievance as to why they don't want him to do that mitzvah anymore, hayu rishayim, then they would be allowed to take that mitzvah away from him. Kideisa b'magin Avram simin shin samech vav sifkat and zayin, v'hapri magadim b'simin kuf namid nun gimel sifkat and mem, kasav de b'tayna rabba mishanin v'lo chashinon l'chashana. These commentaries write that when there's a significant grievance against the person, then you are allowed to take the mitzvah away from him, and you don't have to worry. The whole reason why you were not allowed to take the mitzvah away from him is because you would be casting aspersions on the individual, that maybe people would come to spread a rumor about him, that there must be something wrong with him if he used to have the minyan at his house for all this time, and all of a sudden now it's at somebody else's house. Shekavanaso afim hachshad yihye bedavar acher. So if there's a significant grievance against this fellow, even if it's going to cause a rumor that isn't true to be started about him, you still have a basis to take the mitzvah away from him because it rises to a higher level of grievance. Now, this is very gray. This is very nondescript, and it's ambiguous as to what is considered to be a minor grievance versus a major grievance. But Rav Moshe wants to say that based on what the Magen Avram and the Pri Megadim say, the Hatam Ulai Mishum Shalazeh Ika Darchei Shalom Ibcha. First of all, the reason why you are allowed to take the mitzvah away from him when you have a more significant grievance could be because, the whole concept of Darchei Shalom is preserving the peace and not doing anything untoward towards any one individual. Well, in this situation, if they have a significant grievance against the person, then to force them to allow that mitzvah to abide by that individual might create also a civil unrest in the other direction. And that's the reason why, there's that escape hatch built into the halacha, that in a situation where the grievance is significant, we do allow the mitzvah to be taken away from him. Shalachein. So based on that, if we look at our situation over here, Af sheshina hanuschaot v'hanegina inam ta'amim chashuvim af lahatir iser zeh, achari shekvar hurgalu gimel shanim. He says, yes, it's true that they feel that they have grievances against this Rebbe, but the grievance of having to change the nusach and having to change the nigunim that they sing on the high holidays does not rise to the level of a significant grievance, because they've already been davening there for 3 years and have had a chance to reaccustom themselves. Aval hata'amim dehafchados v'hazilzulim yicholim kishemakpidim lahachshiv zeh leta'amim chashuvim lahatir isr zeh dedarchei shalom. We might possibly entertain the idea that their argument that the Rebbe is insulting them and is frightening them with his words and is almost like cursing them from the pulpit, that might rise to a level of a significant grievance as to why they would want to take their davening elsewhere. And that would also override the concern of Darchei Shalom that rumors will start about the Rebbe if everyone starts to leave him. Aval, so he says, I will grant you that. Aval einam te'amim lahatir isur chamer diyorid lu'umnaso. But you still have the first problem, which is causing financial ruin to the rabbi, which is the first part of our discussion. Shahachsam sofer masik b'simin ayin tes u'tehu midioraisa ayin sham. And the Chassam Sofer says that invading someone else's financial turf is a Torah prohibition, a biblical prohibition. V'im ha'emesu kedivrei haRebbi she'ein lohem hata'anos elu asur. He says, and furthermore, the Rebbe claims that he didn't say anything that was so terrible to his congregation, and therefore they really don't have that grievance. So then it would be asur because of Darchei Shalom once again. Aval ein shayach lahashbiya al zeh mekeven shuhu rak leisser v'lo lahotzas mamon v'hem yachushu l'nafsham im ha'emes kedivrei haRebbi. He says here there would be no point in even discussing if anyone should take a vow to swear that they are frightened or not. He says, because we're not talking about forcing people to pay money over here. We're just talking about whether or not it was usher for them to go daven elsewhere. And as a result, he says that he says he's not prepared to impose a shavua at all. Okay, so in any event, but they should still consider very carefully whether the Rebbe may have a point in his argument that they are not justified in their claim. So then he concludes with as follows: V'hinei ata shenivtal kvar beis hakneses sheyastu b'makom hakarov. Now we see the last part of the story. The last part of the story is that they started a second shtibel in the neighborhood, and then they ended up closing it because it didn't gain enough steam. So they made a breakaway shtibel, and then they ended up closing the shtibel. And what did everyone end up doing? V'holchen lihitpalel b'yeshiva de Brooklyn, dehu makom rachok b'keviyot minyan, v'hu gam makom shemitpalalim sham mitchila. And now what all of these people who broke away do is they walk farther, and they daven at the Brooklyn Yeshiva, which is not clear whether that's Torah. It's probably Torah Vidas, or it could be some high school. We're not sure where this is. And they daven there now. And basically, the Rebbe's shtibel is fairly empty. It's relatively empty. And he doesn't have the old group that was used, the old chevra that used to daven by him. And now he's very upset, and he feels that he's entitled to financial compensation. So imhu racha kol kach shelo nechshav bigvulo shebishvil kiviu samamim shechu sheod anashim shiu holchem lispal bebeis hakneses shel haRebbe yelchu l'sham leka iser hasagas kavul. He says this is an established yeshiva. They've had a minyan there for years. The reason why the Rebbe opened up his shtibel in the first place was because it was such a far walk from where the Rebbe lives. So Rav Moshe says, I'm not concerned that the yeshiva has any liability in this case at all, because if it's sufficiently distant from where the Rebbe lives, and you don't have to worry that they're going to start attracting other people to come daven at the yeshiva because of the distance, so then there's no problem of hasagas kavul, of encroachment, because the yeshiva has been there for many years, and they, you can't stop people from davening at a place where they want to daven, especially if it's far away and it's already an established minyan. V'im haminyan demitchila hayasham gam ken me'anashim charedim, harei haya beis hakneses kazeh mitchila ve'ein lesor. He says, and especially if this type of Jew, this type of Haimish Yid, this Haredi kind of Yid, used to daven at the yeshiva anyway in the past, then you can't stop the yeshiva from basically continuing its business as usual. It's just that now people will walk a longer distance because they don't want to daven at this Rebbe shtibel anymore. Afim gan mikan yelchu l'sham im lo yashpiu aleihem. He says, it's not a problem if the people that are in the Rebbe's neighborhood want to walk there, as long as the yeshiva doesn't actively try to entice them. Avol al kol panim taina hashniya yesh lahaRebbe al elu sheyispalalu etzlo mitzad takana de darchei shalom v'nidon kideleil. But the Rebbe still has a financial claim against these people. His financial claim is that you have caused me ruin because I invested so much. It would cost a fortune to renovate my apartment so that it's now usable as a regular home, and so I'm going to have to take a loss if I have to end up closing up the shtibel and selling it. And so Rav Moshe feels that they should do something to do some kind of financial appeasement in order to get the Rebbe's forgiveness. Beligram bahashpa al acherim sheyelchu mibeis hakneses shel haRebbe ika memela levad iser yored lechayv shel chaveru gam iser lifnei iver the hareha acherim yavru ba'atzmam. He says, and finally, Rav Moshe says that to try to influence anyone who is currently davening at the Rebbe Shtibel to leave the Shtibel, not only is that further causing financial ruin to the Rebbe, financial reduction, but it's also a violation of Lifnei Iver, placing a stumbling block in front of a blind man, i.e., causing another person to sin. Because if you try to argue to them why I left and why you should leave as well, then you're in violation of causing another Jew to sin on top of everything else. Okay, and so that's the end of the tshuva, signed Rav Moshe Feinstein. Okay, comments, discussion. Anyone want to discuss this any further?
Rabbi?
Yeah.
If we're talking about two, let's say, Hasidic shtibels, but what happens if there's like a Young Israel and a Hasidic, and it first started, it was a Young Israel type, which is really not the nusach of the Hasidic people. Would Rav Moshe still hold, and if that was the only reason?
Yeah, I mean, listen, any slight detail could change the psak halacha radically. And that's why this is such a complicated halacha, is because there are so many different permutations of what could happen in the real world that could change the situation. You can't extrapolate from this particular situation to other situations which are not really comparable. If let's say it's a totally different nusach, and the people who move into the neighborhood realize that this shul is not for them. It's just not the same nusach. It's not the way they like to daven. It's not the same hashkafa. There could be a number of reasons why they want to start their own shul. They do have a right to do that, especially if they had never really fully patronized the original shul. They do have a right to go somewhere else. So there's a very distinct tension between giving people multiple options and between trying to make sure that you don't ruin the economic stability of the original institution that was there first. We have this all the time. It's a concern in Thornhill as the community has grown and different stripes of Jews have come into the community. We have to understand that that the bayit cannot possibly service every single stripe. And the same thing would be true if a person is a Chabad Chassid and the shul does not serve his needs. He has a right to start a Chabad minyan. The difficulty becomes if, let's say, a breakaway shul decides that we're going to be the exact same nusach and we're going to have the exact same hashkafa, but because we just want our own place, we're going to do our own thing. That's really the case that Rav Moshe was talking about. And remember, Rav Moshe felt that the slight discrepancies in nusach that the Rebbe had presented them with was not enough of a compelling reason to start another minyan. Today, I don't think that argument would fly. We're over 60 years later out from this tshuva, and the world's expectation that everything should be done exactly my way has changed. That's the social attitudes, and actually I'm going to be speaking about it for my Shabbos drasha. Social attitudes about how everyone feels that everything should be customized according to my specific desires, and down to you go to a Starbucks or a Tim Hortons, and you get to decide how many sugars, how many milks, what type of coffee, whether it's dark roast or light roast, and whether you want the milk to be steamed or not steamed. And there's so many different varieties. So as a society, we've become to expect that everything should be done exactly the way I want it, and I'm not supposed to try to compromise in any way for the sake of some kind of greater good or considerations of the other. That's just, we've become a more, in certain ways, because of the wealth that we've accumulated, with greater wealth and modernization comes a greater ability to break away from the collective. But at the same time, it becomes a much more selfish way of viewing the world, that I'm entitled to have it my way, and I don't have to worry about anyone else's considerations. So, it could be that Rav Moshe felt that in this particular instance, 60 years ago, when the world was very different, even in a place like Brooklyn, where there were limited numbers of shuls in different neighborhoods, you have to take into consideration not just what you want for your type of davening, but also the fact that you're going to be causing financial loss for the person who's already got the established minyan. Not as simple to do that 60 years later, where, first of all, most people will not listen to that. And they simply won't accept that as a standard of consideration. I mean, when you think about it, no one has even discussed this concept in the establishment of different types of minyanim here in the neighborhood. People basically put up a shingle and they say we're opening up a new minyan, and they just do it. And it happens prevalently in all different walks of Jewish life: Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Hasidim, non-Hasidim. It's going on all over the place. And so it's sort of like the cat's out of the bag, if you know what I mean. Okay, but at least you see that there was a time when people would take a concern about this for their neighbor, for their competing institution, based on financial considerations. All right.
Rabbi, how would, this might be off topic a bit, but how would the Beis Din enforce something like this?
It would be very hard.
It
would be very hard. It seems from the tshuva that Rav Moshe was speaking to a concerned group of Jews who really wanted to do the right thing, because otherwise, these people from who broke away could basically say, oh well, I look at this tshuva and it's clear that you have no financial claims against us. You can't coerce us. You can't litigate. Rav Moshe says it's not even actionable in a Beis Din. But if you want to fulfill your heavenly obligations, you should do whatever you can to appease the Rebbe and ask him for mechila. And also remember, he said just asking him for mechila without providing him with financial remuneration is not enough. If his claim is I've been caused a financial loss, a significant financial loss from your actions, you can't just say, well, please be moichel us, and then walk away. That's not enough. If you're sincere about your desire to get mechila, then you have to show that you're willing to put your money where your mouth is. So this whole tshuva, Rav Moshe had said at the outset, was not actionable in Beis Din. There's no way the Rebbe would prevail in a Beis Din, because they could make a shavua or even just testify that the Rebbe was doing things that made it just unbearable to continue davening in the shul. And how are you going to argue with that? So Rav Moshe looked at it based on hearing both sides, and he came up with his determination that he's not such a bad guy, this Rebbe. It's, he was driven to a frenzy at one point, but he's calmed down now, and you got to cut him some slack. I'm not sure that I would be so forgiving. I mean, if someone lectured me from the pulpit and told me that I was a goy and I was a communist, and all those other things that they claim that the Rebbe has said, that doesn't seem that he's contesting, but he just says, well, I said it one time. I'm not sure if I would be so forgiving. But I guess it depends on how it was said, and but it really seems like he lost it at one point. He just lost his temper. And Rav Moshe felt there, you got to cut him some slack. Anyway, it's a tough business, the rabbinate, lose your temper one time and it's over. It's curtains for you. Got to be careful. Yeah.
Rabbi, just so you know, that applies not only to the rabbinate, but to many, many positions.
Yeah.
That if you make, if you lose it, so to speak, you can be held accountable and probably should be held accountable.
That's right. I'm sure in the medical profession, every patient is a potential lawsuit and a forfeiture of your license because, you lose it with one patient and that's it. It's curtains for you. Yeah. Yep. Very, very true. Very true. Okay. So I think we'll hold it here. Tomorrow we will have shir. I just want you to know if anyone is considering fasting, the fast begins tomorrow, according to what I have written here at 5:48. 5:48. So if you wanted to wake up early and then have a cup of coffee or whatever you want and a little nash, and then we can have the shir at 6:30. On Purim, we will not have shir, Purim morning, on Friday, because I have to go to the early minyan. So we'll take a day off on Friday, but we will have shir, Amir Tzashem, tomorrow. Okay? All right, so everyone have a good